To God be the glory.
Hello, welcome back to our study of the book of Genesis. Now we've made it down through chapter 19, and so we're going to start chapter 20 in our lesson today. I want you to notice the things that take place as we look into chapter 20. Let's read verses 1 through 7, and then we'll go back and we'll make some comments concerning those things. It says, "And Abraham journeyed from there to the south, and dwelt between Kadesh and Shur, and stayed in Gerar. Now Abraham said of Sarah his wife, She is my sister. And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night, and said to him, Indeed, you are a dead man because of the woman whom you have taken, for she is a man's wife. But Abimelech had not come to near her. And he said, Lord, will you slay a righteous nation also? Did he not say to me, She is my sister? And she herself said, He is my brother. In the integrity of my heart and innocence of my hands I have done this. And God said to him in a dream, Yes, I know that you did this in the integrity of your heart, for I also withheld you from sinning against me. Therefore I did not let you touch her. Now therefore restore the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you shall live. But if you do not restore her, know that you shall surely die, you and all who are yours." So this is the same problem that we saw back in chapter 12, when, of course, Abraham said that Sarah was his sister instead of his wife. Now, she was his half-sister, so what we have is a half-truth here, but in actuality, it's a lie because he's not giving the information that he should and that the enemy needs. Now, if he would have said that she is my wife, then Abimelech has shown himself to be a righteous one who may not have even have taken her. He may have respected that. But Abraham was not trusting in God and that God would take care of him. And so he says this lie, that she is just my sister. Now, you have to wonder about this mistake that Abraham makes once again, because it's happened before, and here it happens again. But let us understand that we do the same thing in a way. Many times in our lives, we will submit to a temptation and sin, learn of our mistake, repent of that, come back to God, make things right, and then later we might be tempted again and fall into the same sin. And this can happen more than once. And so before we are too hard on Abraham, saying, well, what's wrong with him? Why didn't he know better? Well, people make mistakes. People have weaknesses. And here was that weakness that Abraham had concerning his own safety, his own security. And he says, well, if I say she's my sister, perhaps I will be spared in that sense. Instead of saying, oh, if I trust in God, God will protect me. And indeed, God will protect Sarah, as is shown in this example. So it's sad to see this happening again, but it's not surprising. We can understand it from our own lives. Now, in verses 3 through 7, we notice that God comes to Abimelech in a dream, and he says to restore Sarah to her husband. And so Abimelech is warned not to commit adultery. Even though Abimelech is not under a covenant relationship with God, he can still be guilty of the sin of adultery. Today, those who are not Christians, they are still under God's law of marriage, divorce, and remarriage. Some would say, well, they're not Christians, so they don't have to follow that law. No, all men are required to follow God's law. And the fact that they are not a Christian, yes, that doesn't mean then that they are free to violate God's law. That in and of itself is a violation. They have not become a Christian, and if they're not following God's law of marriage, divorce, and remarriage, that simply adds to their guilt. And so here we see that all are under God's law. Now, notice the next section, verses 8 through 13. So Abimelech rose early in the morning, called all of his servants, and told all these things in their hearing, and the men were very much afraid. And Abimelech called Abraham and said to him, "What have you done to us? How have I offended you that you have brought on me and on my kingdom a great sin? You have done deeds to me that ought not to be done." Then Abimelech said to Abraham, "What did you have in view that you have done this thing?" And Abraham said, "Because I thought surely the fear of God is not in this place, and that they will kill me on account of my wife. But indeed she is truly my sister. She is the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. And it came to pass, when God caused me to wander from my father's house, that I said to her, 'This is your kindness that you should do for me. In every place, wherever we go, say of me, he is my brother.'" And so this is the plan that they had worked out, it seems, from the very beginning. Now, it's interesting to see Abraham's feelings concerning Abimelech and his people. He says, "Well, I thought the fear of God wouldn't be here." But indeed, there was the fear of God. And Abimelech, when he is warned concerning this, and that if he does not make things right, him and all of his would be destroyed, we see great fear and reverence for God. And they want to make things right and do what they are supposed to do. And naturally, they're upset with Abraham that he has put them in this position. And so here things will be worked out for the right way. Verses 8 through 13, you see that reproof that comes against Abraham. And we also learn more concerning that half-brother-sister relationship with this plan that they had from the beginning. Now let's go 14 through 16. Then Abimelech took sheep and oxen and male and female servants and gave them to Abraham, and he restored Sarah his wife to him. And Abimelech said, "See, my land is before you. Dwell where it pleases you." Then to Sarah he said, "Behold, I have given your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. Indeed, this vindicates you before all who are with you and before everybody." Thus she was rebuked. And so then, of course, both of them are being rebuked for this lie of telling others that, she's just my sister, she's not my wife. And of course, with that, they would take her and not kill Abraham. He's worried about his own safety. And if he would have only trusted in God and to realize the all-powerful God is going to take care of him. The all-powerful God is going to protect him. But we see the weakness of Abraham with this event. So verse 17 says, "So Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, and his female servants. Then they bore children. For the Lord had closed up all the wombs of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife." And so we see the punishment that had taken place, but then we see the prayer of Abraham, the prophet of God, and then they are restored. You think this is kind of just a side note to think about this event, but it really helps us to understand the nature of people and how they are, and also how fear can affect us. We see the fear of Abraham. He's worried going into this strange land, what's going to happen to him, what's going to happen to his wife. And so we should learn a lesson from that. The dangers of fear and what fear might do to us today, and how we might decide to disobey God or tell half-truths, really lies, because of our fear. We can't let that happen. Here the Old Testament is written for our learning, and that we may look to these examples and say, okay, I see what Abraham did there with Abimelech. I see the situation. I understand that. I'm not going to make the same mistake. I'm going to trust in God. And so let us learn to truly learn from this mistake that Abraham has made and trust in our God, and not to let that fear cause us to make decisions that we should not, and to handle those situations in a wrong way. Now, we know we're not going to be in exactly the same situation as Abraham, but still there are things that happen in our day where we might be tempted to tell those half-truths, and in fact really lie and cause problems for ourselves and others. Now let's go on to chapter 21. If you look at our outline, where we are now, it's the birth and marriage of Isaac. And of course, Isaac is the son of the promise, and we see this is confirmed time and time again. And we also see the birth of Isaac and the expulsion of Ishmael. And so this is chapter 21, verses 1 through 21. So let us see this events concerning the birth of Isaac and Ishmael being sent away. Chapter 21, starting with verse 1. And the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. For Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the set time of which God had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him, Isaac. Then Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. And now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, God has made me laugh, and all who hear will laugh with me. Now this is different than her laugh before. This is a laugh of joy and happiness. Verse 7, she also said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? For I have borne a son in his old age. And so it is a great time of joy for this family. Isaac is born just as had been promised. And yes, that fulfillment of that promise had been delayed. It had taken quite some time for it to be fulfilled, but God had promised it. And so you know that it was going to be fulfilled. Abraham was 100 years old at this time. And so you can think about the joy of this situation and how before perhaps Sarah laughing because there's just no way it could happen in her disbelief, but now she's laughing in joy and happiness because she has given birth to a son. And so here we have the birth and the circumcision of Isaac. Now, let's look at 8 through 14. So the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the same day that Isaac was weaned. This was a special occasion to mark that aspect of his growth and his development. In verse 9, and Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, scoffing. And therefore she said to Abraham, cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, namely with Isaac. And the matter was very displeasing in Abraham's sight because of his son. But God said to Abraham, do not let it be displeasing in your sight because of the lad or because of your bondwoman. Whatever Sarah has said to you, listen to her voice, for in Isaac your seed shall be called. Once again, God making it clear, no, there's not going to be a shared inheritance here. No, the seed is going to pass through Isaac. He is the son of the promise. Verse 13, yet I will also make a nation of the son of the bondwoman, because he is your seed. So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and skin of water, and putting it on his shoulder, he gave it and the boy to Hagar and sent her away. Then she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. It's interesting to see several things here. Yes, this is the time of happiness. Here the child grows and is weaned. You see the development of Isaac, but also now you see Ishmael, Hagar's son, who is scoffing, mocking, ridiculing this situation. And Sarah begins to wonder, okay, there's going to be these problems that are going to develop over time between Isaac and Ishmael. And she can see that occurring, that problem that is developing because they chose to make it so. She was the one who chose to give her handmaid to Sarah, gave to Abraham. Now, what you see in this is really the fruit of polygamy. Polygamy was not God's plan. From the very beginning, he would said it would be one man and one woman. But see, sometimes man decides, well, I'm going to do it my own way, and I think I might have a better way. That's what happened here. And so you see this polygamy that has resulted. And so Abraham says, well, we haven't received the son of the promise yet, so I'll just take the handmaid, have a son by her, which will be giving credit to that birth, and therein I'll have a son of the promise. But indeed, Ishmael was not the son of the promise, and God never authorized this action. And so we see the sins that result because of it, and the problems and the tensions in the family because of it. Now, in verses 12 through 21, we see that God sanctions this for Ishmael to be sent away. Isaac, of course, is the seed of the promise, verse 12. But he also says that in Ishmael there's going to be a great nation as well. It's not that he's going to forget about Ishmael. Ishmael is the son of Abraham, though not the son of Sarah. And so God is not going to forget him. And so God is going to remember him as well. Now, notice this next section. As he's sent away and departs to the wilderness, it says in verse 15, and the water in the skin was used up, and she placed the boy under one of the shrubs. And then she went and sat down across from him at a distance of about a bow shot. For she said to herself, let me not see the death of the boy. So she sat opposite him and lifted her voice and wept. And so what a sad situation is this. They're sent away. They've run out of water. She thinks, oh, surely we're going to die. In verse 17, and God heard the voice of the lad, and then the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven and said to her, what ails you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad, and hold him with your hand, for I will make him a great nation. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And she went, and she filled the skin with water, and gave the lad a drink. So God was with the lad, and he grew, and he dwelt in the wilderness, and became an archer. He dwelt in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. So just as God had promised that he would not forget or forsake Ishmael because he was Abraham's son, then God remembers and hears their prayer, and he answers them and provides them with the water that they need. You think about the lack of water and what despair and what grief there would be. Well, God answers her grief. And so the promise that he had made to Abraham that Ishmael would become a great nation as well, it begins to be fulfilled. And so we see that Ishmael grows up, becomes an archer, and marries an Egyptian woman. And so this would be the beginning of that lineage from Abraham, yes, but not from Sarah. This wasn't the son of the promise. Now, let's notice this next part, chapter 21. Look at verse 22 through 24. And it came to pass at that time that Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, spoke to Abraham, saying, God is with you in all that you do. Now, therefore, swear to me by God that you will not deal falsely with me, with my offspring, or with my posterity, but that according to the kindness that I have done to you, you will do to me, and to the land in which you have dwelt. And Abraham said, I will swear. So it's interesting here that Abimelech, this is a king, and the name Abimelech, that's the name of a king, much like Pharaoh is just the name or the title of a king. That word Phicol, that means literally mouth of all. And so not only a general, but a spokesman for the people is what's being talked about there. And so Abimelech wants peace with Abraham. And Abraham agrees that there will be peace. Now, look at chapter 21, verse 25. Notice what it says there. It says, "Then Abraham rebuked Abimelech because of a well of water which Abimelech's servants had seized." And so here they're trying to live in peace. They're in the same land, but understand this is a desert place, and water is scarce, and water is precious. And so there's going to be disagreements at times concerning the water. Verse 26, "And Abimelech said, I do not know who has done this thing. You did not tell me, nor had I heard of it until today." So Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and the two of them made a covenant. And so here you see the problem is resolved in a sense. Verse 28, "And Abraham set 7 ewe lambs in the flock by themselves. And then Abimelech asked Abraham, What is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs which you have set by themselves?" He's saying, this seems kind of unusual. What is taking place? Verse 30, "And he said, You will take these 7 ewe lambs from my hand, that they may be my witness that I have dug this well." Therefore he called the place Beersheba, because of the two of them swore an oath there. And so making water rights paramount in this situation, saying, okay, I want it known that I'm the one who actually did the work, who I provided this well, this water that I have. Verse 31, "Therefore he called the place Beersheba, because the two of them swore an oath there. Thus they made a covenant at Beersheba." So Abimelech rose with Phicol, the commander of his army, and they returned to the land of the Philistines. Then Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba, and there called on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham stayed in the land of the Philistines many days. Now, as Abraham was traveling about, of course, there would be these issues that would come up because, of course, he needs water. You might remember when Abraham and Lot first had to separate because their flocks and herds were so great that they had to make sure that they had enough pasture land and water for their animals. Well, as he's traveling about, understand that Abraham is meeting these other people who also have flocks and herds, and so these issues have to be dealt with to make sure that everyone has the water that they need, that they can provide to their animals. Now, when you think about this Beersheba, which actually means well of the 7, in verse 31, you see that, and this oath that takes place between them, that here is that agreement. We see the covenant, of course, between God and Abraham, but here Abraham is making agreements with others, and so trying to live in peace. Now in verse 31, notice it says, he called on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And this is the first time you will find that in Scripture. It's the everlasting God, the powerful God of unknown and unlimited times, is literally what the Hebrew means when you see that phrase, the everlasting God. Now, let's notice the next thing in our outline. This is the sacrifice of Isaac. Here we are in chapter 22, verses 1 through 19. So God was asking for Abraham's spiritual surrender, that indeed that Abraham would give back to Jehovah this great gift, the promised son Isaac. Now, God had given to him this promised son. He was 100 years old, and so he's going to test Abraham to see if Abraham truly is committed to God. Now, look at chapter 22, verses 1 and 2. Now it came to pass after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, Here I am. Then he said, Take now your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. Now notice this, it says God tested Abraham. God is not tempting Abraham to commit evil. God does not tempt us to sin. James 1 and verse 13. And God never actually wanted Abraham to sacrifice his son. If Abraham had killed Isaac, that would have actually been a disobedience to God, since the angel of the Lord later told him in chapter 22 and verse 12, "Do not lay your hand on the lad or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." And so by instructing Abraham to sacrifice his promised son, God is giving Abraham that opportunity to prove his loyalty to him again. And this also gave Abraham that chance to develop a more complete and mature faith. And so understand that as God is testing him in this sense, that really this is for Abraham's benefit. This is not so God can know whether Abraham really will follow him. No, God knows all things. God is omniscient, and so he knows all. This is for Abraham's benefit, to grow his faith, and so that he will be more trusting in God. Now, was this needed? Well, evidently so, because that's what God is telling him. But also we see it from the example of his life, that here we've seen Abraham once again make the same mistake to tell Abimelech that Sarah's his sister. And so in that sense, that lack of faith that he had, the weakness of his trusting in God, it needed to be developed. It needed to grow and to mature. And so here God is testing him for his own benefit, that he can do this. And so he says to go and to sacrifice, knowing, of course, that he's not going to allow him to sacrifice his son. Abraham's not going to kill Isaac, and God would not be pleased if Abraham had done such a thing. But here is the test to see if Abraham would really listen to God and follow the instructions and do what God commanded him to do. And then, of course, God is going to provide a alternate sacrifice so that the son of the promise, of course, will not be killed. Now, we're going to have to stop there because our time is at a close. But I want you to understand that this is important information, and we're really at a pivotal point in the book of Genesis. And so please read the rest of the chapter. I want you to have a good knowledge of the information that we're going to be covering so that you can understand it better as we go through this material. As we close each lesson, I always or almost always say, the lesson is yours. And the reason why I say that is because all that I can do is present this information to you. Then it's up to you to decide what you're going to do with that. It's in your hands. You decide whether to take these lessons and learn from that and adjust your own life according to what God would have you to do. That's the point of our studying together. Not just that we learn these facts and that they're somehow just random facts not to be thought of again, but no, they are to be applied. That we learn these things so that we can better serve God. And so I can present to you these studies, and you can learn this information from God's Word, but then what you do with God's Word, it's up to you. You've got to decide to say, yes, I'm going to learn from this, and I'm going to adjust my life accordingly, because I want to be pleasing to my God. I want to serve Him in the right way. And so time and time again, I will say, the lesson is yours. It belongs to you, and you determine what you're going to do with this information. I pray and hope that you will apply it to your life and live as you should and be that faithful servant of God. And in the end, that you would have a home in heaven and that we will see each other again at that time. we'll have to close here. As I say, the lesson is yours.